Hello, everyone. Today, I'm going to share a very interesting story with you. It is said that this story is true. We can't know how accurate that is, but we can indeed say that it is a truly instructive tale. When I came home one evening, my spouse was serving dinner. I took her hand and told her that there were things I needed to say. She sat down at the table and began eating silently. Once again, I saw that fear in her eyes. Suddenly, I stiffened, unable to open my mouth, but I had to express my thoughts. I want a divorce. She didn't get angry, didn't respond to my words, she just asked for the reason. I couldn't respond, and she got very angry about it. She threw the fork and knife in her hand. She yelled at me, saying I wasn't a man. We didn't speak a single word that evening. My spouse cried all night. I was aware that she was curious about what would happen to our marriage, but I couldn't say anything to satisfy her. I've fallen in love with Jane, I don't love my spouse anymore. With a heavy conscience, I prepared a marriage contract. I was going to give her the house, the car, and 30% of the company. She glanced at the contract briefly and tore it apart. This woman, with whom I had shared my life for 10 years, had become a stranger to me. I regretted the time and energy she had invested, but I couldn't turn back. I was deeply in love with Jane. Then she started crying uncontrollably, a reaction I had anticipated. Her tears brought relief to me. I had been contemplating divorce for a while. The idea had become an obsession in my mind. Now, I felt this emotion even stronger, and it seemed like the right decision. I came home late the next evening and found my spouse writing at the table. I was very tired and went to bed without having dinner. The hours spent with Jane had exhausted me. I woke up at some point and saw her still writing at the table. But I didn't care, turned my head, and went back to sleep. The next morning, she presented her terms to me in writing. She didn't ask for anything from me, she just requested a month's permission to announce our divorce. During this time, she wanted us to behave like a normal family. The reason was that our son would have exams in a month, and she didn't want to burden him during this period. This was acceptable. There was one more thing. She wanted me to remember how I carried her over the threshold on our wedding night, and for a month, she asked me to carry her to the bedroom door every morning. I thought she had lost her mind, but for the sake of making our last days bearable, I agreed. Later, I told Jane about these conditions, and she burst into laughter, saying it was absurd and that eventually, she would have to accept the divorce. Since I had brought up the topic of divorce with my wife, we hadn't had any physical contact. For this reason, on the first day, when I picked her up and carried her to the door, I felt a strange emotion. Our son was standing behind us, applauding. "Dad is carrying Mom," he said. It pleased her a lot, and his words hurt me deeply. I carried her from the bedroom to the front door, a distance of 10 meters. My wife closed her eyes and whispered to me, "Don't tell our son about our divorce." I nodded, with a heavy heart, and said okay. I left her at the door. She went to the bus stop to wait for the bus that would take her to work. I went to the office alone. On the second day, playing this game seemed easier for us. My wife rested her head on my chest, and I smelled her scent. Suddenly, I realized that I hadn't looked at her for a long time and noticed that she wasn't as young as when we got married. Lines had appeared on her face, and her hair had turned gray. The passing years hadn't gone by unnoticed, and at that moment, I questioned what I had done to. On the fourth day, when I picked her up, I felt a sense of trust. This was the woman who had gifted me 10 years of her life. On the 5th day, this feeling of trust had grown even stronger. I didn't mention this to Jane. As the days passed, carrying her became easier, perhaps due to the training I had inadvertently undergone. One morning, I watched her as she pondered what to wear. With a hint of rebellion, she mentioned that her clothes felt a bit looser every day. Suddenly, I noticed how gracefully she had slimmed down and lost weight. It seemed that this was the reason why carrying her had become easier every morning. Then, she hit me in the face. She was carrying so much pain and sorrow in her heart. Unconsciously, I stroked her head. At that moment, our son came in and said, "Dad, you have to carry Mom." It had become a part of our lives, the father carrying the mother from the room to the door. My wife called our son over and hugged him tightly. I turned away. I didn't want to change my decision at the last moment. I picked her up and carried her from the bedroom to the door. Her hand was on the back of my neck, and I held her tightly, just like on the day we got married. I had become restless about her significant weight loss. On the last day, when I carried her in my arms, I didn't move. Our son was at school, and I told my wife how much closeness had diminished in our lives. I went to the office and jumped out of the car without locking the door. There was no time for that. I feared every moment might change my decision, and I rushed up the stairs. When I reached the top, Jane opened the door. I told her that I wasn't going to divorce my wife. She put her hand on her forehead with a puzzled expression and asked, "Do you have a fever?" "I'm sorry, Jane, but I no longer want to get divorced," I said. Our marriage wasn't colorless due to a lack of love, it was because we had forgotten each other's value. Now I remembered the vow of loyalty I made to her when I carried her through the door on our wedding day, promising to carry her for the rest of my life. When Jane understood the situation, she slapped me, closed the door, and started crying. I immediately ran downstairs, went to the first florist, bought a bouquet of flowers for my wife, and wrote on the card, "I will carry you every morning for the rest of my life." When I arrived home, a smile spread across my face. With flowers in hand, I went to the bedroom and found my wife lying on the bed, lifeless. She had been battling cancer for months, and I hadn't noticed while dealing with Jane. She had tried to protect me from the negative attitude of our son, knowing she wouldn't live much longer. At least she wanted to remain a good wife in our son's eyes. It's the little things in a relationship that matter. Villas, cars, and lots of money are not the essentials. While these things may make life easier, they can never be the foundation of happiness. Dedicate time to your relationship and focus on things that bring trust and peace to it. Experience a happy companionship. The reason many lives fall apart is often due to people giving up just before reaching their goals.